All right, we're just going to give a couple of minutes to allow, we're just bang on 2 o'clock, so just give people a minute or two to pop in. But those already there, welcome to the session. Let's see, good. I think everybody's probably fatigued with back-to-back meetings online these days, working from home. You seem to move from one meeting to another, and they can definitely run over. So, so I just want to give people an extra minute or two to join. But we definitely won't delay. Like I say, it'll be purely just a minute or two, and then we'll crack on. Okay. All right. Good to see. Okay. I think we'll crack on from here. So, as I said, welcome to this webinar. It is Ask Ergo Anything, and that's anything to do with Microsoft Azure. And in order to facilitate that, answering those questions, I'm Ergo's CTO, and on the panel today, my 4 colleagues are Kevin, Niall, Emre, and Brendan, and I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves briefly so you understand who they are. Kevin?
Sure, thanks Steve. Hey folks, thanks everyone for coming online. So if I haven't met you before or worked with you, my name is Kevin Greene and I'm the Azure Practice Lead. So looking forward to helping out you folks with all your questions related to the webinar today. So cheers.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, Niall Moran. I'm a technical specialist manager in Microsoft Ireland. So I run a team of technical specialists across all of our cloud offerings, Modern Work, Dynamics, and Azure.
Hi, I'm Brendan. Go ahead, Emre.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Niall. I'm Emre Martin, working as a consultant at Ergo, and it's really great pleasure for me to be all of you guys. Thank you.
Hi everybody, Brendan Dunleavy is my name. I head up the software development group in Ergo, so that spans across both custom software development and then across Power Platform on our deployments into Azure.
Great, thanks very much guys for introducing yourselves. Okay, so why listen to Ergo for a Q&A around Ergo, around Azure? So essentially, we are a cloud partner and we're actually Microsoft's cloud partner of choice. For Azure services, and why is that? Let me tell you why that is. We are certified Azure migration experts under the Microsoft Azure Migration Program, AMP. That's a bit of a mouthful, all of that, and I'll get into some of that a little bit later. But this year we are Microsoft's Partner of the Year. We're also Modern Workplace Teamwork Partner of the Year. And we're also very lucky to be also awarded the Partner of Social Impact winner this year. And that was for the work we did with a charity called Make-A-Wish. Microsoft also uses other partners for fast track services. This is to help customers on board for Azure services, Microsoft 365 services, and so forth. And up to now, the only Microsoft fast track ready partners available for those services were UK or European based. They were outside of Ireland. And as of this year, we have become the only Irish Microsoft fast track ready partner. So we don't have to go to the UK and all that anymore. And then also within our expertise within Ergo, we have 3 MVPs. So that's most valuable professionals. These are experts in their fields who promote the adoption of the technology and the use of technology and basically support the implementation of the technology. 2 of those MVPs have already introduced themselves. That's Kevin and Emre. The third one isn't on this call today, but just to give you an idea, I suppose, of where we are with cloud services and Azure specifically. Looking a little bit deeper into that, so obviously we're a gold partner in lots of areas, and you can see them all listed there. The most relevant here is to the right of that. The Microsoft endorses this provider, because this is a screenshot from Microsoft's site, not our site. Endorses Ergo for advanced specializations, and these are on Azure services. So modernization of web applications to Microsoft Azure, and Windows Server and SQL migrations to Microsoft Azure. And we're the only partner in Ireland with both those specializations. Actually, the only partner in the UK and Ireland with both those specializations. So our investment into the expertise, best practices, and so forth around Azure services and Azure migration services is significant. And those awards were hard fought because they're independently audited. Microsoft appoints an independent auditor to assess us on our practices, our processes, and our expertise and so forth, and it validates that we can deliver to an expert level on all those areas. Anyway, just wanted to get that out there. So why should we answer questions? And where do we get our data from? So that's where it comes from, that kind of investment. One of the things we've asked ahead of the call today is, what's the main challenge a business faces when moving to the cloud? And you can see here there are two pie charts representing those findings. The one on the right is the industry findings. This is not our specific findings. This is, and you can see the biggest challenge that the industry findings sourced was finding the right skill set to help people move to the cloud. Now, that's a challenge for us internally we've got an Azure team, but we're always looking to enhance that Azure team, and we're training constantly our own individuals internally. But you can see quite on the left with our own poll, security and compliance. When we queried with our customers, security compliance was the big one, followed then by time and cost. But I suppose only then was the right skill set coming up as a primary concern. And then getting leadership buy-in used to be a really big one, but it's just been diminishing and diminishing because everybody, including leadership at C-level, are obviously seeing the benefits of moving to cloud services, and probably COVID and so forth has definitely advanced that position with customers. But hopefully that industry finding on the right, where 48%, the challenge for them is finding the right skill set. Hopefully we can answer that for you and provide that right skill set, so that won't be your primary challenge. Anyway, look, don't want to do PowerPoint presentation all the way through, so let's move into the Q&A session. This is interactive, so please put your questions into the chat. Want to hear what you want to find out and know about. There are no stupid questions, so please don't be shy. I ask lots of stupid questions on a daily basis to my team of subject matter experts. And they're only stupid because you don't know them. So please ask anything. As I say, there's no stupid questions. So we're happy to answer anything you can. If anyone has any great dad jokes, put them in as well. I'll push your question up nearer the top because I just love dad jokes. But anyway, let's move on and let's see what we've got in. So in order to kick things off, I'm going to kick off the first question because we put out to all our customers and contacts, what are your questions if you have ahead of the webinar, if you can't attend or you have questions potentially that you would like addressed. So we've got some of those. And for instance, this it's been rephrased, but it's a common one that we saw from more than one customer. So we've seen our Azure resources, costs and governance get quite messy. How do we put manners on it with clear reporting, cost transparency, and compliance alignment? So yeah, like I say, this one comes up a lot because a lot of people have started on their Azure journey themselves and, put some services up there, try this and that, see what it's like. And while that's great, as anybody in tech will tell you, something that starts out as a demo or a POC very quickly turns to production and people are using it and they're like, oh God, it wasn't intended for that. So Actually, let's put this question to Kevin. Kevin, do you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So as you mentioned, if I was to word this into a very clear and concise question, it's how much will this cost me? So when we're talking to customers, they love the tech. We're passionate about tech. We can show the cool stuff that Microsoft have, but ultimately it's only as cool as your CFO or your accounts department are going to pay for it. So how do you put manners on it is probably a polite way of putting it. What we'd recommend is build your Azure environment. And this goes for people who are already in the Azure space. So if you've got a mature or semi-mature Azure environment, or if you're ready to dip your toe and get started, what we recommend is look at what's referred to as the landing zone. So if you're that way inclined, Microsoft have a 900-page document called the Cloud Adoption Framework. I'll drop the link to the CAF into the chat here. So obviously not something you're going to read front to back, but it has all of the guidelines. And Microsoft recommend from a best practices overview as to how you should deploy your Azure landing zone or your Azure framework. The framework takes into account components such as governance. So you'd want to make sure that you're controlling that Azure environment with things like Azure policy, Azure management groups, locking people down into what they can and cannot deploy, the size of the SKUs, like the VM sizes or the database sizes. You might want to restrict what region. So from a GDPR or a data privacy perspective, you might want to restrict what region you or your business can deploy those resources into. And of course, cost management. So Microsoft have a really cool feature in Azure simply called cost management. And if you leverage the budgets feature in cost management and align that with another feature called Azure Advisor, well, then you can literally get recommendations from the Azure portal. It will tell you if your workloads are overutilized, underutilized, if you've got like public IP addresses that are not assigned or attached to any workload, you can maybe delete them. It will also say, or allow you rather, to assign a budget. So you might say for that subscription or that resource group or that business unit, depending on what way you carve up your environment, we want to assign a budget of, let's say for argument's sake, €100 a month or €1,000 a month, whatever the budget is. And you can have Azure email you, your CFO, the application owner, the business unit owner, whatever, when that budget hits a metric such as maybe 50%, 75%, and 100%. And from there, you can use it as a notification engine. So purely just an informal way of just letting you know you're reaching budget or you've breached it. Or you can be a little bit more aggressive and you can integrate Azure automation and some additional capabilities whereby if that budget limit hits the 100% mark, you can literally shut down or delete those workloads. Obviously a very drastic piece of action to take, but we've certainly delivered that for a number of customers who require that, particularly for test dev environments as well. So I suppose start with the landing zone, get your governance right, work into your governance plan, your cost management with budgets, and use all of the advisory tools that are in the platform. You can't go wrong from there.
Cheers, Kev. All right. Hopefully, if anybody needs to clarify any of that, pop it into the chat, and we can definitely make more, give you more detail on that if required. So looking at the next one, is there a need to maintain ADFS for app federation with third parties, or should you just use your enterprise applications if licensed for conditional? So yeah, definitely the strategy should be to get rid of ADFS wherever possible and move to Azure AD. But Emre, I'll let you answer this one.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Actually, the basic answer is depends on your application, which you want to have federation with third party. So if your application is having a modern authentication protocol, such as SAML or OpenAD Connect, that's okay. You are ready to configure your application to be able to use with Azure AD Connect, or maybe you would like to use some built-in connectors, such as like for Salesforce or ServiceNow or other many application. But if your application legacy, also you can use Azure Application Proxy to publish your application while you are taking care about modernization of your application. And there are some points you should consider before you are planning to migrate to Azure AD, like does your application need certificate-based authentication? Do you need any custom attributes for to keeping attributes like some SQL, or do you have any complex claim rules? Because some claim rules can have some special attributes from the Active Directory. Or do you have any on-premise MFA solution or any dependency? So to able to find the answer for all this question, actually, first we should discover and classify our environments. So to able to do that, we can use ADFS application reports, and the reports will provide us which applications are ready to go to Azure AD or not, which dependencies we have, which modernization, which we need to do. So to able to do that, we need AD premium license, but there are so many tools that you can do this assessment so freely.
Yeah, look, it's a big area, right? Identity, authorization, and authentication. Like there are other platforms out there like Okta and Duo and so forth that provide some similar services, but I don't know, just from what I've seen, there's nothing as prevalent and as comprehensive as
Exactly.
the Azure identity platform, identity authorization and authentication platform. So you can use, and we do, like we implement Azure AD all over the place for modern workplace, for Azure workloads, everything. But you can also protect everything on-prem. You don't, even if it's legacy applications, old applications, you can still implement Azure AD authentication with multi-factor. You can use conditional access policies,
Exactly.
so people can only access from certain types of devices or places or so on and so on. You can implement all of that still on anything you're using. It doesn't have to be just Azure workloads or Office 365 workloads. But yeah, absolutely, where you can get away from ADFS, do. It's been superseded by Azure Active Directory services. So yeah, good one. Another one we have here, just interrupt me, Rebecca, if because I'm not looking at the IMs in case anybody put something in that we need to jump onto. But looking at this one, what Azure training courses would you recommend for a systems administrator supporting a hybrid environment? Kevin, you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say I can take that one, Steve. So for everyone attending in Teams, there's a raise hand feature. If you wouldn't mind, can everyone raise your hand in Teams if you have any Azure training experience at the moment? Official.
Not seeing any hands go. Oh yeah, there you go. There's definitely hands going up. Okay.
We've got a few, right? So the majority, we'd say probably 95% of people on the call. Thanks, guys. You can take your hands down. And the majority of people on the call have no current Azure training at the moment. And it's also a question I get asked quite a lot. As an IT pro or a former server hugger, I loved hugging my on-prem servers. This whole cloud thing came along, and it was scary because I put myself into a position with the stuff that I did for many years in Microsoft System Center around on-premises monitoring and operations management. And I built up a really good skill set in that specific area. So this new cloud platform coming along kind of made me feel like I was starting out in IT again, and it was quite scary. So where do you start? So one of the best resources, free, and I love free. So one of the best free resources for Azure training out there at the moment is the Microsoft Learn platform. So microsoft.com/learn. Again, we'll stick it into the chat now in a moment. So the Learn platform will allow you to register. So if you've never sat a Microsoft exam or training before, it doesn't matter. Just use a free email address to sign up, and it will walk you through a couple of high-level questions to figure out whereabouts you are on your cloud journey. So absolute zero knowledge, a little bit of knowledge, whatever. And when you answer those questions, Learn will then recommend to you, this is the type of track that we recommend you go on, and you learn from for free on the Microsoft website, and it will give you documentation, walkthroughs, downloadable or online. Some people prefer to have a hard copy. You can back it up with Microsoft official curriculum content if you want, but most of this is all online. There are labs, there are code samples, there are demos. It's awesome. And you get a few little bonus points as well. If you want to have some competition with some of your work colleagues, you can actually have a bunch of you do the same courses and see which one of you get a badge sooner than the other. But ultimately, at the end of each module then brings you up to a certain level, and it will then recommend a specific Microsoft exam for you to sit and to pass, hopefully. And the very starter one I would recommend is the Azure Fundamentals exam, or it's also known as AZ 900. And fundamentals is literally that. It will take you through, this is the cloud, this is, a framework, this is a virtual machine in the cloud, this is storage account, all that type of stuff. And in fairness, some of the licensing models as well. And if you follow that path first, so microsoft.com/learn, and then sit and work for or pursue the Azure Fundamentals certification, that will set you on the right path. And don't for 1 minute think that all those skills that you learned and you obtained over the years as your IT pro personality are gone to waste. What I find is when I specialized with my on-prem stuff with SCOM, I wasn't doing a lot of networking, a lot of storage because it was a specialist area. Now that I'm back in Azure, I'm back to the stuff I did, when I started out in IT, learning again and working with networking, address spaces, storage, all that stuff that I learned many, many years ago. That's all coming back, and I'm applying it completely to this whole new cloud platform. So top level advice, follow the official courses, reach out to us in Ergo. I'm always available. Social media, most of you I think I'm connected with on LinkedIn or maybe Twitter. Feel free to reach out. I can help you with some advice. But know that those skills that you've obtained and you've learned over the years will absolutely apply to that cloud platform as well.
Okay. Just coming in. Finish the training, come join the team. Sorry, who was interrupting there?
That was Niall. Sorry for interrupting. If it's okay, I'll come in on that one. I totally agree with everything that Kevin said. I wasn't one of those server hookers, to be honest. I was born in the cloud. Yeah, right. What I would say as well, right, is Azure isn't one of those things that you can kind of do a training course on and then you're done, right? It's changing so quickly and adapting so quickly. You have to really think about kind of continuous learning as part of that. And, that kind of alludes to what Kevin was saying about Microsoft Learn and the certifications. But I know a lot of companies can think, let's get somebody on a training program and then they're good to go. But actually, it just really isn't like that with Azure. It really is changing so quick. We're innovating all the time with it. New features coming in, and it's not that if you miss them, it's detrimental, but there can be a huge amount of value to the business and to the admins if they keep on top of it. And one of the tips I would have as well as all of the learning is there's a lot of blog posts that we or blogs that we have. So the Azure blog, I would in my Outlook, for example, I have a folder that feeds off the RSS feed off that blog, and every day I just read the subject lines of every entry. It's difficult. It takes about 20 minutes every day, believe it or not. There's so much coming out, and I just read the subject line. And if I need to, then I'll dig deeper into any one of those areas. But that's a way of just keeping a very high level touch to all the new kind of stuff that's coming out on a daily basis. But it can be tricky, right? You got to keep on top of it.
Yeah, right. Those blogs are actually brilliant. And I follow your own as well, Niall, which are quite insightful too.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for that, guys. So next one there is, what's the best type of training? Another training question. Training my team should get when supporting Office 365. Do they need full Azure fundamentals, or is there something more tailored they should focus on?
I can take that one again, Steve.
Sure.
It pretty much aligns with what I said previously and what Niall is saying. With Microsoft 365, it's the Azure fundamentals will certainly help you to a certain degree, but Microsoft have obviously identified that people need fundamentals training and exam certification in each of those key areas. So there is actually a Microsoft 365 certificate. It's MS900 is the exam code on that. So I would still recommend the same path. Follow the Microsoft Learn site. Choose your module. So the questions that you answer, it will identify that is your focus area or somewhere that you're interested in, and then work through the Learn modules to bring you to a point where you're ready to sit that MS900 exam. And from there, once you're happy enough, like the old Windows Server exams and where you had to do a bunch of core exams and then you had to break out and do maybe email and IIS and TCP/IP and all that type of stuff, you can do the same for cloud, whether it's Microsoft 365 or whether it's Azure. You want to break out, start with the fundamentals and then move on from there. But pretty much same story, just a different track on the Learn and a different exam reference.
Okay, thanks, Kev. Let's look at the next one. How long does it take to migrate an application into Azure? Well, that's how long is a piece of string? Anybody want to put their hand up to grab this one?
Maybe like any good consultant, I guess the answer to this is it depends. So, I guess from an application perspective, you're looking at how big is the application, how complex is it, how critical is it to the business? I suppose that's one set of considerations. Because what that will inform is when we move an application into Azure, there's a continuum of options you have there, from a black box lift and shift through to, are you looking to decompose your application, re-architect it to take advantage of the Azure PaaS capabilities? Do you want to take some of the functionality that's currently in your application to push it into a PaaS component in Azure? And I guess that's, I guess some of the considerations around that are how critical is the application to your business? How frequent are changes required in the application? If this is a black box that's sat in a server somewhere for the last 10 years, you're content, you're not going to have to make any changes to it. Perhaps you're happy just to lift and shift and accept you're not going to get any other benefits from the cloud perspective. But on the other hand, if you're looking to, this is actually critical to our business, this application will need to change over time, and therefore this may be a point where you can look at decomposing it, bringing parts of it across to the cloud in pieces or collectively, and again pushing more responsibility over onto Azure. I guess the other consideration there then is in terms of how you actually run the application. So are you looking to containerize it? Are you push it into a set of containers? And then in that case, where in the stack you want to deploy it? Do you want to deploy it on a Kubernetes cluster? Do you want to do something where you're pushing more responsibility to Azure Container Services, for example? So there's a lot of considerations there to take on board.
Why would you do that, Bren, for people who mightn't be familiar with containerization or Kubernetes? Why would you want to do that?
Well, from a couple of perspectives, it's going to, in terms of simplifying deployment, in terms of better use of your resources and more efficient use of resources, it makes it a lot easier. I guess if we look at the landscape even from 2 years ago, it's quite interesting. In a lot of cases, 2 years ago, we would have recommended, go push your workloads onto Kubernetes, use Azure Kubernetes Services PaaS as a way of deploying that. In so many ways now, the PaaS offerings around, for example, application container services may sometimes suit the needs of the customer. So in that case, you can actually, as a customer, you may actually be able to skip over the need to have the complexity of Kubernetes and deploy directly to Azure Kubernetes or Azure application services. So I suppose simply put, that means then you can deploy your Java or your .NET application directly into Azure. You don't actually need to worry about that clustering piece. So again, it's all trade-offs. It's flexibility. You'll get more flexibility from the Kubernetes perspective, but you have more complexity. So you've got trade-off with the app services in that regard.
Yeah, and of course that's where we're definitely seeing shifts around this. So initially, lift and shift type operations were prevalent. Let's take those existing on-prem servers or VMs and put them up into Azure and see if they make sense financially and so on. But realistically, people are looking at it now to go, hang on, there's a lot more to this, obviously, than just lift and shift. We can do these in much better ways. Containerization, much more effective in terms of those application components from a cost, security, scalability, much more efficient, effective, and easy, potentially even easier to manage, but far more flexible in terms of what we can do with those services now, rather than just think in the older concepts of servers and, you know, provisioning RAM and CPU and storage levels and so forth for a server that's going to host that's going to sit on an operating system and so forth. There's so many different ways to skin this cat now and get better value out of these services.
I think the important piece on that one, though, Steve, is and for anyone else listening in, you know, your migration of any application or any workload is only as good as the assessment that you take part in before that engagement. So an assessment is going to be naturally with the tools. Microsoft have some great tools, but there's also some other third-party tools that you can look at to assess the readiness of that workload. Of course, the cost. So you need to understand what the cost estimates are. Again, most of the native Azure tools will tell you that straight out. But it's also speaking to the application vendor. So we've had a number of scenarios where we will assess a workload for migration, green light to the customer and say, yeah, we're good to go, application is good. They go back to the line of business vendor and the vendor says, oh, we don't support the cloud, or we don't support IaaS, which is a little bit crazy because if you're on a VM on-prem or whatever, but you know, there's also that to consider, and it might technically be fine and it will work, but if the vendor doesn't support it or is a little bit cagey about supporting it, either look for a different vendor or take that into consideration. And it may well be a case that some applications, for supportability reasons, have to stay on-prem, and then you're looking at a hybrid landing zone scenario with your Azure platform as well. But yeah, it's all about the knowledge.
Good points. The other thing I'd add is, you know, it really depends on the application architecture, assuming, you know, that it's an application that you're looking to migrate. You could have applications built in a way that we would describe as cloud ready, right? And, you know, it's relatively straightforward to move those applications into the cloud, but no application comes without a database. So you have to think about the database, and then no application comes without some level of connectivity. If it's a public facing app, it's probably easier. If it's connected, if it's an internal facing intranet or something like that, then it's got to have connectivity. And then you're thinking about how you stretch your network out to Azure in a secure way. So whenever these questions and whenever these answers start with it depends, it's down to Kevin's point there. You have to do the assessment. You have to understand what it is you're actually moving. And then the other point I'd make as well, you have to understand why you're moving it. Because if you're just lifting something and putting it into our data center with no clear reason as to why you're doing that, if it's a cost reduction maybe, or if it's, let's say, you're extending the reach of the application out to more users globally and you need that scalability or availability, then that will help define how you architect that in the cloud, which will define how long it's going to take. So you really need to do a lot of that planning up front.
Yep. Okay, thanks guys. I'll move on to another one. Next one is, how does Azure fit for hosting Citrix services as compared to other public cloud vendors, Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud Platform? Anybody want to put their hand up for that one? I mean, I can tell you that we're currently doing a lot of Windows Virtual Desktop deployments for customers because virtual desktops and virtual apps as a way to provide, especially people working remotely, obviously with the current situation, it has proven extremely valuable to organizations, you know, to re-enable them in this new environment we're living in. And Citrix, I know, like Citrix Cloud resides on Azure for one thing, so that would be a significant advantage. But essentially, you can manage your WVD environment through Citrix Cloud, or you can provision your Citrix farm within Azure and manage it from Citrix Cloud Services, which sits in Azure. But anybody else want to talk to that one?
Actually, I can say a couple points, Steve.
Okay.
There are actually 3 different Citrix services which is integrated with the Azure. The first one is Citrix Virtual App Essential. The second one is Citrix Virtual Desktop Essential. These services are, as clear from the names, one for application virtualization and the second one for desktop virtualization. So on the bot model, it can be buy from the other marketplace. So anyway, all your resource, I mean, the resource which you provision, machine or it's an application, it will be hosted on Azure. And there's no Citrix Studio experience, I mean, for management. All management will be done by Azure portal. So the next one is Azure Virtual App and Desktop Service, which is more strong than the other two, actually. This service can be bought from the Citrix markets. And the advantage of that service that your resource can be located on Azure or your on-premise as well, which means that a hybrid model. So when we compare with the other two services, that app and desktop service have the usual interface what the user have experienced like a Citrix Studio. So and all other core components like a license server, deliver servers, Citrix Studio will be managed by Citrix.
All right. Okay. All right. Hopefully that's clearer. Moving on to the next question then. So how does Azure only support Windows apps and services? Brandon, you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, I guess in short, just no is the answer. I know. Like recent stats pushed out by Microsoft from earlier in the year, I think it's up to 60% of all VMs now are actually running on Linux. So certainly within the application development space, and the guys can talk to more broad Azure Infra in a minute, but certainly from the app side of things, you know, whether it's open source, whether it's .NET Core, whether it's Java, Angular, various front-end frameworks, a lot of the applications that we would deploy on Azure are running on Linux. So whether they're in container images in the likes of CentOS, or they're running on some of the more mainstream Linux flavors, Azure would support all of the mainstream Linux flavors essentially. So no was the answer there.
Okay, understood. All right, let's have a look at another one. How do we ensure we're extracting the optimum value from Azure services? That's a good one. Niall, want to have a look?
I'll come in on that one. It is a good one. It's a difficult one to answer as well.
That's why I gave you the hard one, Niall. I want to give you easy ones all the
time. Let me talk to what I see in terms of how customers use Azure. Typically what I see goes back to actually some of the things we were talking about earlier on in terms of migration. Typically what we see is any customer that starts to migrate services, apps and so on into Azure, over time, their consumption of Azure, their usage of Azure starts to drop off as they optimize that usage. So the number one thing is, I would say, is people tend to over-engineer initially when they go in, and then they start to optimize. And the optimization comes from the real benefits of what Azure brings, right? Whether it'll be the monitoring and analytics that show you, you know, the kind of CPU usage on your VMs, the ability to scale, the ability to leverage PaaS components, that's platform as a service, over IaaS or infrastructure as a service components. These things can optimize your application estate and can and allow you to get more value. And the value is not just in terms of cost, but it could be in terms of scalability. For example, if you just move an app into the cloud, and that's a kind of a legacy application sitting on a VM, okay, and you might reduce some cost if you project that over a 5-year period or something like that, right? You might reduce some cost by doing that. But if that application is not built a certain way, or if you're not using the right components in Azure, you might not be able to scale that out when you need to. So you won't get the value that you need there. So it goes back to my answer earlier on for migrating. You really need to be clear on what value means. Is it that you need to scale this application out to more users than you ever had before? Has it got to be elastic? In other words, it's going to scale out and in the seasonal spikes, or is it just pure cost savings you're looking for?
Yeah.
And once you answer that question, then you can start to look at, okay, I now need to re-architect my application to be more cloud friendly, because when I do that, that's how I'm going to get the value. and then I'm going to start using more of the PaaS services, maybe the Kubernetes service, like Brendan said earlier on, to achieve that value, to get that value. Or if it's just pure cost, you might look at things like reserved instances rather than paying for virtual machines. You might look at, well, let's reserve those clusters of virtual machines. It's a pretty static application. It's not going to have to scale in and out. And let's reserve them for a number of years in terms of cost. And that's going to give you the most value for those virtual machines. So it's one of those questions that has a depends at the start of it again. But it is really important that we offer so many different ways of doing this. But it starts with good planning, good assessment of the application, and a good assessment of what value means. Because again, I think people assume you're talking about cost in terms of value, but it may not be. It may be more resilience, availability, or scalability, or something like that. So that's where that analysis initially needs to come in.
And maybe just to add on that, I guess the other consideration from a value perspective could be how rapidly you need to meet the business's needs, how often the changes and level of adoption you need there. So, you know, what level of automated deployment pipelines, etc., do you need there so that you can make the changes as quickly and safely as are needed to support the business.
Again, the common theme is coming back to that, you know, initial assessment, understanding, and planning that's critical, you know, because everything seems to come to that. It depends, obviously. That's a common prefix to a lot of our answers. It depends on the, you know, the type of solution and so on. But the planning, the assessment phase, and then planning and design are critical, you know, realistically, to not just do it in the best ways, but again, optimize the value, extract the best value. All right, thanks, guys. Moving on to the next one. How can we manage multiple Azure environments? Yeah, so
I could take that one, Steve, if you got something on it.
Azure customers.
So basically, if you have multiple Azure environments, so normally an organization that would have a requirement to manage multiple Azure environments would be probably a managed service partner like ourselves. But we do have a reasonable number of customers who either by choice or design, non-choice or design, they have a bunch of different Azure tenants, right? So we're not talking about just subscriptions or resource groups. We're talking about completely separate Azure tenants that they need to manage. It may be through business acquisitions. So maybe an organization acquires another organization. Both of those organizations have their own standalone Azure environments, and the group IT or the central IT team, they now have a requirement to manage the governance, the landing zone, all of that across multiple environments. So how do they do it? Historically, if they're doing it through the portal, if they're attached to the user interface, historically they're logging into the portal, then with one tenant they're managing it, then they're logging out of that portal into the other tenant or directory and they're managing that one, and it's a little bit wishy-washy. One answer is DevOps. So if you or your organization are leveraging a DevOps environment using CI/CD, you can manage all of the code and multiple connections inside your DevOps organization, and you can push out your changes and your approval workflows and all of your control there. But you know, there's not many organizations out there using DevOps at the moment, particularly in Ireland, in anger, considering most organizations are predominantly IT pro driven as opposed to developer driven. So there is a relatively new service in Azure called Azure Lighthouse. And Azure Lighthouse enables you, so it's brilliant for us as managed service partners, but if you're an organization that has these multiple tenants, you can literally act as the managed service provider for your organization. You can onboard the Azure subscriptions in any tenant that you want, obviously with the relevant permissions required, and there's an onboarding process. But once you do that, you then have visibility and control of multiple Azure environments in one. So for example, if you create an Azure policy, and let's do something simple. If you say, I want an Azure policy to tell me if all of my resources are based in North Europe data center, right, which is in Dublin. So if you want to check that across every resource in every environment that you manage, with Azure Lighthouse, you can run that policy and assign it to what's referred to as a management group. And a management group is a logical container that can contain subscriptions. And it doesn't care where those subscriptions originate from. Once those subscriptions are in the container, we can target the policy at that level. And when we do, we then get a compliance report back that will tell us, hey, look, you've got a bunch of resources sitting out in, Asia or sitting over in the US or whatever. And it just gives you that control straight away. If you've got an on-prem environment, just to keep that connectivity scenario going even further. So if we use Lighthouse to connect multiple Azure environments, if we wanted to then integrate that management and that centralized control to our on-prem environments, there's a new on-prem management tool or service from Azure called Azure Arc. And Arc allows you to bring your on-premises servers, for example, and recently announced your databases now as well, allows you to bring those workloads up into Azure from a management perspective. So they can still live and be running on your VMware, your Hyper-V, or your physical environment on-prem, but Azure Arc publishes those workloads up into Azure as Azure resources. So it kind of tricks Azure into thinking it's an Azure resource. And once Azure can see it, those same policies that you use to manage those multiple Azure environments and those different tenants and subscriptions, those same policies can also be applied to your on-prem. So you've got that full 360-degree management scenario as well. So there's some great tools out there. And if you're not familiar with Lighthouse, it's not going to be hugely relevant unless you have multiple tenants to manage. But certainly, I think everyone on this call at some point should play around with and kick the tires with Azure Arc, particularly for hybrid scenarios.
Okay, so it's not just multiple Azure environments, it's multiple Azure or hybrid or on-prem environments as well. You can boil them all in, pull them all in. And by the way, Azure Lighthouse is free. There's no cost to using Azure Lighthouse, which is good. So thanks, Kevin. Thanks for that.
Yeah, on that point, actually, just nearly all of the governance features in Azure are free. So, I mean, obviously Azure is a cost model, and, if you spin up VMs and databases and stuff, you got to pay for whatever you consume. But most of the governance, nearly all the governance is free or minute costs if you're managing thousands and you're monitoring them from Azure. But as you say, the Lighthouse, policy, management groups, all of those features are all free. So yeah, why not? Why would you not use them?
Exactly. I know Rebecca is doing a great job in the background of getting the questions popped up onto the slides. I don't know how much time left we have to go through, but I'll kick this one off anyway. Is audit logging, monitoring and alerting in real time implemented in Azure?
Yeah, I can take this one, Stu. Actually, it's we can say that it's near real time because depends on it can be sometimes 1 or 2 minutes delay latency with Azure monitoring. And if you need to talk about Azure Active Directory logging first, there is two types of different logs: activity and security. And activity logs can be 2 and 3 minutes latency, and for the security logs it can be sometimes 4 or 5 minutes. So if you need to talk about Azure Monitor sites, which is the activity logs again for to all resource, it's the same. It can be 2 or 3 minutes latency, and of course sometimes the alerts can be can have some delay, depends on this latency. But if you consider to use a local analytic use some different agents to collect logs from the machines, and it's most of logs can send immediately.
Okay, so mostly near real time.
Yeah.
Okie dokie. Cheers, Emre. All right, what controls are in place to ensure that information security risks in cloud environments are mitigated?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So there's a few things to kind of touch on here. The first one I'd say are compliance and certifications, right? So whether it's ISO, PCI if you're processing payments and credit cards, or HIPAA if you're in particular, in the health industry and stuff like that. So there's quite a comprehensive set of certifications and accreditations that are really, really important, because that gives you the platform that you can work on, and actually reduces the effort for you in terms of getting your certifications in place as well. So that's really important kind of baseline. Over and above that, then there's a couple of things to be aware of. One is the kind of, the depth of encryption capability that's in Azure, whether it's encryption at rest or encryption in transit. There's a lot of capability in there, depending on the services that you're using. Okay. You have the ability to use our key vault to store your own encryption keys so that you can encrypt stuff and not use shared keys that we would not have access to. So there's a lot of different options from an encryption point of view. Something that I'm a big fan of is what we call confidential computing as well, which is the ability to encrypt an entire memory space of a virtual machine. And that just means if someone did somehow get access to a virtual machine, for example, and did a memory dump, that memory dump will be encrypted, and those keys are stored outside of the VMs. So there's a lot of capability there in regard to encryption. And then the final point I would make is one of the benefits of being in the cloud, actually, and especially when you're using Azure AD and the kind of graph of signals that we get from all over the world, from all of our data centers in terms of telemetry around what threats look like, is really key, because that allows us to bring what we call advanced threat protection, and that's kind of proactive security to play, so that we're not waiting for something to happen and then doing a root cause analysis to find out somebody left the port open. We're actually analyzing traffic all the time, looking at things, and then we make that available to you through certain services within Azure. One of the most important ones, for example, is Azure Security Center, and actually it's one of those services. Again, there's a free version and there's a paid for a more advanced version, but even the free version, a lot of people are using Azure and not having that turned on. And all that will do is we'll just look at your environment, look at your setup, and tell you what you should be tweaking. It might, for example, recommend a web application firewall in front of an exposed public IP address. Or it might recommend closing certain ports that you've left open by default. So it's just a really simple advisor from a security perspective in the cloud that's really important. So they're the kind of things. Apart from that, you've got all of the normal networking security that you would expect that you would have on premise, like firewalling, network security groups, the ability to control access, filter access by IP address, completely shut off your environment for no public access, and route it back to your own network through an express route, which is a direct connection into our data center for greater bandwidth and greater security. So tons of options there. Key message I would say, though, is don't make the mistake of putting something into the cloud and assuming that we look after all of the security. We obviously look after a great deal of security, but your VMs are your VMs, your applications are your applications. You need to do the same security due diligence on those apps as you would on premise. We give you all the capability, so there's no reason why you can't, but you do need to put the effort in there. Do your pen testing as you normally would, your vulnerability scanning as you normally would.
I'd just like to add to that as well. I mean, it goes back to that original poll that we did, where what industry findings, security compliance was one of the biggest challenges, and obviously it was the biggest challenge that we saw within our poll from customers. I have to say, though, I'm a long time in IT, but the security focus and provision of security services with cloud services, it's far more comprehensive and gives you far more confidence in it being secure in the cloud services than we ever had in traditional IT environments. I mean, the whole Azure presence and Microsoft 365 presence, we take the implementation and adoption of it from a zero trust perspective. So you don't trust the individual until they're authenticated. You don't trust the device until it's authorized, the application, the connection, the data encryption, and so on and so on and so on. Everything is contrasted against how secure is it, how reliable is it, and can we validate it. Anyway, I think Niall's very much answered that in a very good way. I think we've got two more. Next one is Azure versus AWS. Niall, Jay.
I hate this question. Look, how do you answer this question? So you can go down into the depths of both of these services, and you can, you know, analyze them feature by feature, and 10 years later you'll come back and you'll come to the conclusion that they're pretty much on par, right? You know, you'll find stuff in AWS that we don't have, and vice versa. You'll find stuff in Azure that they don't have. I would say from a kind of a feature by feature basis, if you're just comparing Azure with AWS, you're going to find that they're two hyperscale clouds more or less on par. And maybe the marketing people in Microsoft won't appreciate me saying that. Where I think you need to be thinking is not Azure versus AWS, but Microsoft versus AWS. And that's a better comparison in my view, because the value I believe we bring over Amazon is the breadth of our stack. Okay, everything that we've mentioned to date around security, around compliance, around hybrid cloud, around integration with the productivity tools in Office 365, extension out to business applications and Dynamics. When you put all of that together, and then that kind of Azure underpinning infrastructure, when you put all of that together, Amazon just don't compete. So it from a business point of view, if you want to make that comparison, I think, you know, off you go, but you're going to find yourself splitting hairs a lot. Whereas if you swap out Azure, the word Azure for the word Microsoft, and start look holistically at your entire landscape, technology landscape, you'll find that Amazon just can't compete with us. And of course, bring that hybrid piece in. In other words, you know, we've you know, spent 30, 40 years helping customers build out their own data centers, whether it's with Windows Server, System Center, etc., SQL. So we understand the on-premise infrastructure that you rely on still. When you think about our partner ecosystem, like Ergo and our ISV partners, again, we've been building that for the best part of 40 years. I think when you add that all into the breadth of our technology stack, there is no comparison.
Okay. All right.
Steve, just check there's no questions coming in on the chat. I'm conscious of time. Do you want to see, does anyone want to come off mute and ask a question to the group before we close out?
Yeah, good point.
If no one does, we can move on. But just to give everyone an opportunity before we close out, I think hopefully we've answered all the questions that people have submitted in so far anyway. No? Okay. I think you're good, Steve. Continue on. Thanks.
All right. Look, I'll probably move towards wrapping up. So essentially, look, as your partner and cloud service provider, we provide obviously cloud services for people, so we can take you on that cloud journey, and we can establish, you know, the economic benefits, the security benefits, performance benefits, and so forth with you, and plan that journey and strategy with you to move to cloud. It's inevitable. Everybody's moving that way because it provides just continual service, commercially beneficial service, and so on and so on. So it's just inevitable it's going to happen that way. So we provide the planning, the assessments, and then moving on to migration services, modernizing applications. I was going to ask Brendan to come in on that AWS versus Azure platform discussion. Maybe we'll do it again because, you know, Brendan leads up our application development team. They've had a lot of experience with non-Azure focused applications and services as well. You know, things like Jira versus DevOps, and lots of different platforms that typically are, you know, more open source. But we've moved our entire focus over to Azure and the Azure platform for all those services now, and very good reasons to do so. So anyway, moving on, cloud management and operations is something we do. And in terms of cloud management and operations, all Ergo customers who have Azure services can avail of our Azure Value Package, which is part of our Microsoft Azure plan. And what that means is that we give for free, just as being an Ergo customer on an Azure platform, we give you proactive reporting. Okay, so that means you get monthly reports on cost management, performance, security, compliance, where you need to be compliant, visibility as the health of your services and resources in Azure, and so on. And then on top of that, you will get advisories from people like Emre and Kevin that will be delivered to you in terms of how you can optimize the workloads, how you can best leverage the value. Yeah, and there is an animation there, I'm being told, which is that it's free for Ergo customers, and that's right. But essentially, you get that all as part of just being an Ergo Azure customer. As well as that is the consultancy side. I'm sorry, I didn't add that. The follow-up consultancy days can be arranged to leverage extensive, our extensive experience in this space. As I say, we've got a huge investment in Azure as a platform, bringing you onto that platform.
Dave, just to come in on that, just to kind of just to mention, you mentioned the AMP program earlier on, which is the Azure Migration Program. That certification that you guys have is really critical. Again, go back to all those questions where we started with, the answer started with depends. The reason for that is it takes planning and it takes deep understanding of the Azure platform to really make that migration work. So that Azure Migration program that we've put in place with partners like Ergo is really, really key. So the fact that you guys are kind of leading the way on that in Ireland is really important.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Niall. So again, thanks everybody for coming today. Please fill out the feedback form. We hopefully will do more sessions if they're required, but in the chat there's a link that Rebecca's just popped in there to find that feedback form. So we'd love to hear back from you. Was it valuable? Could we have done things better? And so on. Just give us your viewpoints in that form. So from there, I'm going to leave it there and say thank you again for everybody for attending. Thanks to the guys for participating and answering all the queries. Again, very much appreciate your time and effort and expertise devoted to this. I'm going to leave the chats open for a while, so anybody else that has questions, feel free to put them in there. We're going to leave it open for a while and we'll respond to any queries we get. But otherwise, yeah, we'll sign off. I know we ran a little bit over, 2 minutes over, but again, thanks everybody for attending. Cheers. Bye-bye. I think it's just down to